Hi, I'm Rebecca Hyde. I'm a 2017 Nuffield Scholar and a Director at TFD Consulting, and I'm joined here today by 2018 scholars Simon Cook, Elliot and Solis Norton. So Simon is a third generation kiwi fruit orchardist based in Te Puke, who developed an interest in biosecurity following the PSA incursion that impacted the kiwi fruit industry in 2010. Andy is based up in Nelson, and he works as a research and business development manager for Whakatua Corporation. And Andy is passionate about the opportunity Aotearoa has to reposition our export offerings. And finally, Solis from down in Dunedin is trained at Massey University and working in the deer industry, and he brings a mix of academic and industry experience to leading New Zealand agriculture towards generally sustainable farming systems from an energy and emission perspective. So, Solis, can you just give us an overview of what it was that you looked at during your Nuffield travels, what your report was on?
So in essence, I was interested to look at New Zealand agriculture from an energy perspective and to see what impact that had on our ambitions to transition to lower emissions by 2050. Quite early on in the piece, it was clear that really the key issue of the emissions challenge globally that we face, it's not really about animals and methane, it's more about humans and their use, the exponential growth of our human population and the exponential increase in the consumption of fossil fuels. So I thought, well, how does that relate back to farming here in New Zealand? And so once I actually got into it, I realised that there's not a lot of coherent data organised to do a serious analysis of that. So I looked around a bit and came across this emerging field of science called biophysical economics. And that in that, you look at an economy or a system, say for agriculture or say for New Zealand society as a whole, but you look at it from a resource perspective, accounting in resources rather than accounting in money. So I was keen to apply that to the New Zealand agricultural sector, but still the data was not consistent enough there. And rather fortuitously, just before I'd started my project, there'd been some national level modelling of scenarios for the New Zealand society out to 2050, the net zero 2050, our big carbon transition. And so they had included in their technical report the data on how they felt the energy mix would look in 2050 compared to how it looked at the present. So I applied this biophysical accounting process to the data in that technical report. And in this report, the financial analysis suggests that between now and 2050, we're going to double our GDP with growth as usual. But when you switch off from that and you look at the resource side of it, the energy consumption, so in 2050 on the scenarios that they've got, is around about 15 to 20% lower than what we have at the moment. So it's about the same as what our grandparents were using in the late 1970s and early 80s. So I couldn't really marry up a doubling of our GDP with a significant reduction in the amount of energy that we use to produce stuff, right? So I've followed on from that and looked into agriculture as much as I could. And I saw there's really some huge opportunities there for us to get past this idea of it's all methane and it's all about the animals within the farm gate. I think what came out was we really need to hold hands across the whole supply chain, from looking at the inputs, what happens within the farm, what happens in the processing and in the distribution and consumption as a system and from an energy perspective, so that we can work out where the weak links are in there in terms of reducing our emissions, reducing our energy input. Which bits are we strong in, which bits are we weak in, and where can we make major changes if the processes or the farm systems are patently unsustainable for our ambitions to get to 2050.
Great. Oh, we'll look forward to unpacking that a bit more during this discussion. So, Andy, if you can just give us an overview of what it is that you looked into during your for your report.
Hi. So I started my project with a kind of like a view on New Zealand's export offerings, and I was looking at them, and I wasn't seeing a lot of nutrition and kind of health messaging and kind of positioning towards that. And so the way I thought I'd approach it is to go and have a look at other countries that weren't dissimilar to New Zealand, and seek out companies that were in the ingredients, the nutrition, the extract space, and just look at what was happening within those companies, how they'd moved into a high value proposition, how they'd repositioned their customers, and just try and find what their struggles were, and what lessons they'd learnt from trying to change their business. And what I ended up with was a realisation that a lot of these different companies around the world had actually changed their business by accident, and it had been because they changed the customer. And so that customer had asked for something different. And then all of a sudden they'd had another opportunity to tailor their production towards. And over time, sometimes quite a short period of time, that just completely transformed their business. And that business turned into an ingredients company. And so I sort of thought, well, that's great, and we can't all just wait around and wait for it to happen by accident. So how do we look at what it would take for us to think and then transition to become more health and nutrition focused from everything that we produce? And so I developed a business model that I thought kind of covered this off, and I've called it a horizontal service model. So rather than our traditional approach of produce something, process it, manufacture it, turn it into products, and then sell to ourselves, and then try and sell to an export market, what this business model does is it allows you to sort of sit in between production across the whole of New Zealand, because we don't have to do everything. But what we're really focusing on first is understanding the consumer and the market. And if we can understand the problem in market, then we can provide a solution to that. And so then you're working in the middle of the space that we're currently is part of our vertical approach. And then what that ultimately gives us is a much kind of more reactive approach to what the problem is, how we can differentiate that, and then how we can backfill with the supply chain that we need. So the thing that was sort of the other major change that I found was that a lot of businesses try to do this within their own business, and it's really hard to disrupt yourself. And so this business model was really set up to become almost like a startup or a cell on the side of a company, and then that gives more freedom to operate. It gives a removal from your normal business, but it gives you a chance to then focus directly on your new customer and your products that you're developing for them. So at the end of it, I'm quite convinced that New Zealand needs to reposition what it's offering to export, and it needs to reposition around health and nutrition. And if we do that, then we can become the health and nutrition solution providers to the world rather than just provide food to the world.
So health and nutrition that's energy efficient. We'll try and work out how we can do that. So Simon, what about you? What did you look into?
So as you mentioned, I come from the kiwifruit industry.
Yes.
And in 2010, we got hit with a bacterial incursion, a biosecurity incursion that was called PSA. And that just devastated our industry. So our flagship product, which was a gold variety, within 2 years, pretty much everything within Te Puke had been chainsawed out. So once flourishing orchards, all that was left was a stump in the ground, and it was actually a pretty confronting time in our industry. And we were extremely fortunate that we happened to have a new variety that had just been released that had tolerance to this disease, and so we could rebuild our industry based on this new variety. It was sheer luck that this variety had tolerance, but it was great management that we had a breeding program that had some depth in it, so we had this product available. But it meant that we could rebuild our industry, and so the industry has recovered and is now stronger as a result of going through this. And it's also given our industry the ability to look back and say, right, we survived this. That was obviously potentially damaging to our industry or could have ruined our industry, but it didn't. What else out there could there be that could have the same impact in our industry? So we put in a body called Kiwifruit Vine Health, and its job is to look at future threats and what else could impact us. And so I'm a director of that organisation at the moment. So that also meant that I have quite a strong interest in biosecurity. And so what I was really interested in is that we have a very strong border in New Zealand. We rely heavily on our border to stop incursions coming into New Zealand. And that border won't stop everything. We've seen from our industry with PSA, dairy industry dealing with Mycoplasma bovis at the moment. We've had fruit fly incursions, etc., bonamia through shellfish. So the border will never stop everything. And so once something gets past the border, and so what we saw with PSA in our case was it was in New Zealand for probably at least a year before we found it. A lot of these diseases will come in and there'll be no symptoms. And so until you know that they're there and until you put in practices to prevent the spread, there is nothing to stop it. So for 12 months throughout our industry, we had pruners walking around transmitting this disease around the district. So by the time we'd reacted to it, it was too late, it had already spread. We saw something similar with M. bovis, that by the time the dairy industry was aware that it was here, it had probably already been here for a year or more and had been spreading around. So by the time you can react to it, that problem's already greater than it could be. So my focus was on individual orchard or farm gate biosecurity, and so what we can do as a farmer or a grower to add another layer to that biosecurity. So if something isn't here yet, that you've still got practices in place, that if it does arrive here, you're going to restrict its ability to spread. And so I was interested in looking overseas at this because most countries don't have a level of biosecurity like we do. So New Zealand and Australia are kind of unique in that we have strong border protection. So I was interested in looking at countries like Europe where they have no border protection to see if they had much stronger on-farm protection. And it was actually quite disappointing to see that there wasn't. There was, even though they'd had foot and mouth go through Europe, about 10 years before we'd travelled through there, when we were there was nothing. There was no attempt to prevent spread of anything. And part of our travels, we came out of Qatar, which is a known foot and mouth country, and we could fly straight into France and be on a dairy farm the next day, which is quite scary when you think about it. So when I looked at these different countries around the world, and then I started looking at where we had incursions in the past, no one was putting anything in place until the threat was already there. Right. So no one was recognising that there was an issue that they could be confronting and being prepared for it. So it's the same as having insurance, is the way I look at farm gate biosecurity, that you don't get insurance after the fire's already burnt the house down. It's got to be in place beforehand. And nowhere in the world is this being done. So we've been trying to look at how and that was the basis of the report, is how do we encourage farmers to engage in biosecurity in peacetime when there is nothing there, so that hygiene practice is already in place when something does arrive, so it will slow the spread before you know it's there.
Okay. So, picking up from that, there's a bit of disruption talking here. So, kiwi fruit industry is being disrupted. Mm-hmm. Business models need to be disrupted. Energy industry's not quite sure where it should be disrupted. So, what could, in hindsight now, What did the kiwifruit industry learn from that disruption that can be transferred into other areas of New Zealand food and fibre?
The kiwifruit industry is lucky in that it's fairly coordinated, so we act as a single body. And so, when we got hit with this disease, as a group, we got together and worked together on how we were going to resolve it. And to me, that was probably the biggest thing, is that our biggest advantage is our ability to work together, which a lot of the sectors probably don't have that same ability that we do. And whenever there's a disruption like that, particularly when it's a worldwide disruption, so that disease for us had gone through all the other kiwifruit producing countries in the world at about the same time. So because they all got hit and because they weren't as coordinated as we were, it then opened opportunities. And so whenever there is disruption, it always opens opportunities, and it's just whoever's organised enough and prepared enough to go and take those opportunities. And I see that as generally as a country as one of our biggest advantages.
Yeah. So you talked to Andy about some of these business models changed by accident. How can we get there before the accident and actually do that disruption ourselves?
Well, I think in the context of what Simon was just talking about, with COVID, we've kind of been in that situation because we're producing food and some of those opportunities have been cut off. But because of what happened, then businesses have had to change how they connect with the consumer or customer here in New Zealand even. So we've seen a lot of companies all of a sudden and develop an online strategy just as a reaction to something that's incurred. But that hasn't been by design, that hasn't been by a strategy and plan, that hasn't been through a vision of what we want to actually get to. So it's a tough time right now because we're kind of in the middle of it, and all of these businesses have created something, and then we've kind of gone back to normal, which then leaves you, well, I've got this new link, I've got this new channel, what do I do with it? Do I continue to invest in it and then build a strategy around that, or build a business model around that, or do I let it go and just assume that we're going to get back to normal? So it's, there's no answer to that because it's business specific, but I think what it does present us with is a real opportunity to understand that we've all got this problem, and whether you're a wine producer, a meat producer, or whatever it is, you've got they've all got the same problem to get with. So we don't have to reinvent it 500 different ways. We can actually work together, and I think that is one of the things that we're going to have to learn through this if we want to make it through and all survive. Is that we can't keep doing everything our own version, and we need to collaborate and work together better. And if we get it right here, then we also have to understand that we're going to have to do it again differently if we want to export, because it's not the same.
Why is that not the same?
So I'm just trying to think, like the way that I kind of describe it the most simply is that I don't think in New Zealand we're the kind of leaders in food fashion, and I think that when we all travel around the world, we see it ourselves. We go to a supermarket, we see food on the shelves and we go, oh, that's pretty interesting. And then a year or two later, it's here. And so if we're going to build a business, that we're going to rely on ourselves to kind of be the test case or the template for whether it's going to work, and then go and export that. I kind of liken it to turning up to a fashion show with last year's winner. It doesn't make sense. And so we're going to have to force ourselves to understand the consumers and customers that we're selling to. And my solution to that is we just need to partner up a lot earlier with the customer. And they've already got that knowledge. And so if we go early on that, then I think we'll get there faster.
Yeah. So countries have very different, if we sort of start to touch on greenhouse gases and that, and different footprints there.
Yeah.
And so we're looking to reduce our emissions. How do we connect with those customers you might have some thoughts here too, Solis, when their understanding of what greenhouse gases are and ours is, we've got animals, they don't have as many animals, it varies. How do we connect with them when they may not understand what our normal is?
I think there's a couple of things there, but one of the things that I think a lot about is all of this kind of pressure we've got at the moment from ourselves and from other entities to change, whether it's emissions, whether it's water reform or environmental or sustainability. But if we're producing food, then we really, and we want to change that, then that's going to be health and nutrition. People buying that are going to understand that. Mm-hmm. And so generally people who are paying for that and are seeking that out want transparency. They want traceability. They want full view into how everything was produced. And then we get to tell our story then. We get to backfill our story then, but we're gaining value from it. I think it's going to be really hard to just do all that and then push it to market. And that's my biggest concern about that environment right now.
Okay, so Solis, biophysical economics, you've touched on that. How do we start to understand where that energy is being used through that supply chain to start to reduce that to meet those customer needs?
Yeah, I think in terms of our international customers and when they want to see that we're doing the right thing, I think it's critical that we can hold up the numbers for them across our supply chain that says, look, here's the proof of our measurements that actually from an emissions perspective, even though these products might need to come halfway around the world to you, the systems that we're using to produce them are suited to our environment and efficient enough that they're still more than competitive with the comparative emissions of the products that you're competing with us on. And I think that's going to be a really important part for the primary sector, and not just to convince that our international consumers that our stuff's good. It's Carolyn Saunders did a lot of work in this area probably 10 or 15 or more years ago now, the Food Miles report that showed essentially that because of the lower input type, more extensive systems that we use here, we can get lamb to the EU just as efficiently as they can produce it over there. So that kind of approach, but it won't just be to the consumer, it'll also be selling it to the urban New Zealand public, that actually as a sector, the primary sector is not actually using that much in the way of energy and producing emissions. A lot of this issue is actually in the urban areas, and you don't see it so much just in the diesel that you put in your tank every day, or the electricity that you use in your switch every day, but the amount of energy that goes into what they call embodied energy, but what's built into the buildings and the roads and the systems, and there's a tremendous amount in there that needs to be accounted for. And when you do that, very quickly I think you'll see that farming and the primary sector is really not at the core of what our energy transition, our emissions transition is about.
So with the kiwi fruit industry, Simon, you are obviously very involved with the biosecurity. If we look at energy within the kiwi fruit industry, the supply chain there's a lot going on there. Is there some, you've already mentioned that the kiwi fruit industry works quite well together. Are there some things that are coming out of there that we could be learning from for other sector groups within New Zealand?
Yep, so at our AGM last year, we actually just launched a sustainability package that the industry is now going to start really focusing on, because there are a number of ways that we impact, and energy use is one of them, but probably the biggest one we're focusing on at the moment is packaging, and the use of plastics, and trying to reduce our use on plastics. And it's actually been quite interesting that one of the outcomes of COVID, before COVID there was a real anti-plastic view on the world, but since COVID, where people are wanting to maintain that food safety and food security, there's actually kind of been a push back towards plastic packaging and wanting to have everything sealed up. So it's about ensuring that if we are going to continue to use plastic, that it's recyclable or made from recycled plastic, and then ensuring that wherever we're doing this in the world, that the recycling systems in those countries can actually cope with recycling. Because one of the biggest issues is that you can have a recyclable product, but it has to have a certain level of recyclability built into that country. And so some of the countries we work in, just that doesn't exist at this point in time. So it is a major challenge. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to be a bit put you two against each other here. Who's more important, the biosecurity behind the farm gate to get it to the consumer, or ensuring that the consumer is getting what they are after past the farm gate? Where's the importance lie for New Zealand agriculture?
Well, the two aren't separate.
They're not separate?
No, so to me it's about food security. So what we're trying to do with biosecurity is ensure that that farm is still able to produce. It's not about increasing the cost or increasing the amount of energy that's used to produce that. It's about just ensuring the safety of that so that we can continue to produce it, because one of the biggest issues in the world is obviously going forward is food security. We know that with the population in the world we've got, that we're going to struggle to feed it in the future. So when you have a major biosecurity incursion and you have a crop that's decimated by it, then it creates food shortages. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to prevent is food shortages.
Anything to add to that, Andy?
No, I mean I agree. It's part of food safety. It's part of trust. It's part of all of that. And I like Simon, have been involved in an industry that's been cut off because of biosecurity incursions. So it's you can never do enough in the pre-planning. But I think if we're all just take the approach that it's going to happen, then we're going to be more prepared for when it does.
And once again, that creates opportunities. Because we can claim that we do have food security. There's countries worldwide that are crying out for guaranteed supply of food. And what we're seeing now at the moment, Andy mentioned before the e-commerce trade. We're seeing through China that historically we'd sell maybe 10% of our product through e-commerce. Now we're selling 30+%. All of a sudden because people don't want to go to supermarkets. So we're seeing a fundamental change in the way people are, shopping and their shopping habits. And we're lucky that our brand has built over years a very, very strong and along with the country a real strong food safety image. And people trust the brand and they trust the food, so they're prepared to buy fruit online. And so that comes from years and years of development and building that brand. But it does mean that New Zealand is highly regarded in terms of food safety. So, when people are forced to buy things online, they can't go to the supermarket, they can't physically look at it, they can't check it before they buy it. So they're going to heavily rely on brands and people that they trust. And that's where I think New Zealand has huge opportunities because of its reputation worldwide, that we can build on that.
When do you think those, did you look into any of consumers in energy, or you were looking more at how to measure it?
I had an overview of the look at where it goes within New Zealand agriculture.
Yeah. Okay. So where's the key areas in New Zealand, on farm energy? Where are we using? Where's our low hanging fruit?
The low hanging fruit.
Yeah. To start to reduce it a bit more.
I think it will be probably in the moderation of fertiliser use through a hand-in-hand assault of lower emissions, but also water quality and regulation from that side of things. There's a lot of energy embodied in fertilisers, particularly urea. I think one of the real risks is in the reasonably near term is our reliance on the rural transport sector and reliance on cheap diesel. A significant change in the price of that could really put some big challenges in front of us. Once you get beyond the farm gate, using a lot of coal to dry milk into milk powder is a good example, and I think Fonterra is already looking at options for shifting away from that towards more of a timber residue or something along those lines. but they've already realised that from a thermal perspective, the coal is an excellent way of generating heat, and pine residue not so much. But also the security of the supply and the consistency of the product. It highlights from a biophysical perspective, from the actual practicalities of this transition that we're looking at, how hard some bits of it are going to be that you don't see immediately when you look at the dollar figures. It's not until you get into the physics of it that it's like, this actually is a lot more challenging than what we could see through looking at the dollars through a financial spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Do you think things like regenerative agriculture will have a big impact on the use of fertilisers?
Perhaps. I read an interesting thing from Jacqueline Roweth recently, who suggested that regenerative ag really wasn't going to be probably the grand saviour. It's definitely got a role to play. It strikes me a little bit like organics was perhaps 20 years ago or 30 years ago, where it's a neat idea. What I would really like them to be is transparent in saying per hectare, without some of those core inputs, fertiliser type inputs, we're not going to make the same amount of product per hectare than what a sharp conventional farmer will do. And I don't hear that coming out of that group yet. They've got a lot of good ideas, but I think they need to be really transparent and say, this is a rejigging of the whole system, and slightly lower output per hectare, and they might be able to tie it to higher quality in some way. I think they need to be clear with that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because how do we get more out of less production? Because that's what that model is setting us all up for. And so if we're not actively investing all of those other parts that are going to get us more value all the way down the supply chain, because no farmer wants to drop 40% of their stock,
No.
But if you give them 50% more, then that's fine.
Changes the balance, doesn't it?
Well, interesting. I mean, the world really can't afford farmers to drop 40% of production because, as I said, looking forward, there is going to be, food shortages, etc., that we're already facing. I mean, there's a certain amount we can help by removing wastage, but there's only so much that we can produce, and there's a large world out there, and we're a significant part of that food basket. So, the onus is on us to maintain production and not back production off, but still produce it in a more efficient and a more environmentally friendly way. So, you're a bit between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like I always think of that thing that you hear people say all the time, that New Zealand can feed 40 million people. It's like, wouldn't you rather feed, 30 million people who are really thinking about what it is they're buying and where it's coming from and really valuing it more? And I think that's, that to me is a much better proposition than just a numbers game.
Absolutely. And I think we've never had a time when everything's equally important. There's not one thing that needs to be dealt with in isolation, and it's how we draw on everything together to then move forward together, because everyone's needing to work together. We've all got similar ideas and challenges, so let's harness that and move forward. So we've talked a bit about your topics and what your what you've learned out of those. So Nuffield is also a lot about your travel experiences and seeing different places in the world. So what's something that stood out for you, Simon, maybe first, that's a standout, away from your topic, but just as part of that Nuffield experience?
I was actually going to pick on something from my topic, because the thing that really stood out for me the most was visiting citrus growers in Florida, and it brought me straight back to where we were when our industry had been cut out and all we had left was stumps, and going over and looking at citrus growers' farms that had been laid bare over there. It really brought home what our industry could have looked like if we weren't lucky enough to have a replacement cultivar. And so that really did bring back home why we do what we do. So other than that, probably the most interesting thing I saw was when we were in Qatar. We went and visited a dairy plant, and so when they'd been there 12 months before, they were milking sheep. It was a small site that was just milking sheep, and we turned up 12 months later and they were milking 8,000 cows. And so within 12 months they'd gone from sand to milking 8,000 cows, and I think it was the first 3,000 of those cows had been air freighted in from Europe between milks, and the rest had come in on a boat in Carve ready to go. So it's, you know, the ability to go from bare sand to fully operational within 12 months. It's just staggering what you can do without a Resource Management Act and with unlimited funding. And you know, on top of that, this is a place with no source of food either. So all the feed is being brought in from another country. So yeah, it's staggering what you can do.
I'd been at that place 12 months previous, seeing the sheep being milked. So yeah. Andy, what about you? What was a standout memory?
Well, I guess for me it was, I mean, my background is in aquaculture, so I through the whole time that I was travelling, I think I might have saw one aquaculture facility, but I got a chance to look across the whole other primary industry. So for me, every place I went and visited was like an eye opener, and it was just all learning. I think in like the Simon, I probably bring it back to the context of my topic and things, but I think the biggest eye opener for me was spending time in Chile and just realizing that everything we produce, they can just quadruple in numbers over the next year. And so it just landed on me that we can't stay in this commodity space, and we have to continue to strive to have a better, you know, aim and vision for our export and for our sector. So for me, it was just those kind of moments that just made it land, and it was like, oh yeah, now I kind of get it.
Yeah, very good. Solis, what was a standout memory for you?
I think mine follows on pretty closely from Andy's. In the time that I spent in Italy with my family was just seeing the culture, the quality of their food and their enthusiasm for it, and its local focus, and it was just so good. And it was like Andy could see the scale of Chile. It's like, well, why couldn't we bring a bit of that passion back to New Zealand? If we're going to have to make this big transition that we're all going to have to hold our hands through, surely we can reimagine what's coming out the output end. And I mean, sure, the Italians have a pretty unique environmental set that they can draw on, but we've got a unique environmental set here too that I think perhaps we should make a little bit more of. And I think we maybe put in a prod for the fossil fuel industry and Qatar's ability to turn sand into dairy cows. They have cash unlimited, and it comes out of the ground in a very black form.
Yeah.
Natural gas in Qatar's case.
Yeah. More money than sense was a phrase we threw around a bit there. So final question. So as a Nuffield scholar, what do you see as opportunities to be leaders within New Zealand's food and fibre sector going forward?
Well, I think the big thing is that having done the travelling and we've had the opportunity to go into our markets, because you know, most of our food gets exported, or you know, a lot of our primary produce gets exported. So having the opportunity to travel around the world and visit some of these markets and spend time in them and spend time with people over there who are growing in those areas, you get a much broader understanding. And one of the things you really struggle with when you're involved with farming is you get really isolated in your little silo on your own farm, and you don't actually get very many opportunities to actually look outside where you are. So you know, the opportunity that we've had to travel and see what we've seen, being able to bring that back to New Zealand organisations is hugely valuable. So, you know, we've got a lot of knowledge that we've developed, and so there's a lot that we can add value to. So, you know, it's, I guess, incumbent on us to push ourselves forward to take up some of these opportunities as they become available. So I think it's probably more about pushing us to want to take up leadership roles as much as anything else.
Great, thanks. Andy?
Oh, I think it's a really exciting time that we're in now. There's a lot of chaos, and that means there's a lot of opportunity. And I think that, just to pick up on what Simon said, I think because it's not just one primary industry sector, it's everybody. That I think we need to see a lot more transfer or collaboration between industries as well. And I think we're kind of quite insular in how we structure, and I think the opportunity to be in more broad conversations is going to come around, and I'm kind of looking forward to that, because you can wear your industry hat, but you also know that it's going to relate to other industries, and sometimes faster. So and the other thing that's exciting is that we're developing new industries all the time, and so I think that every one of those industries we should be doing by design. We should be working out what it is we want to be and what value we want to have. And if we do that at the start, then we're not going to be having this discussion about how to change in 20 years' time. So I think I'm looking forward to those kind of discussions and projects that are going to come up.
Yeah, right. And Solis, what about you?
I think looking ahead in the deer industry and across agriculture more widely, the amount of regulation that's in place now and that's coming down the tunnel towards us, I think I'm not sure that it's going to be sustainable for our farming systems, and I think the leadership opportunities will really come out of the amount of disruption that we see, partly through COVID-19, and it will be partly through that recognition that actually this amount of regulation to try and improve our productivity is kind of counterintuitive, and I think that's going to lead to a crunch where there's going to be some real opportunities for some leadership thinking and some major reimagining of how we put our ag systems together.
Yeah.
Exciting, totally exciting times. If we had had this conversation 6 months ago, it might be far more business as usual, but it's a different situation now.
Yeah, I agree.
No, absolutely. Hey, well, thanks very much, guys, for coming in and sharing your thoughts and having a chat. And if anyone's looking for your reports, they're all up on the Nuffield Rural Leaders website. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.